So we're going to make a real quick video, kind of an installation instruction video here on this Savage Axis magazine catch upgrade kit. But first we got to do the obligatory disclaimer here. Whether you're buying this kit to be able to run different magazines, or you're buying an aftermarket trigger, or whatever you're buying for your gun, you have to take responsibility for those modifications. The manufacturers, me included, we're trying to give you the best solution we can, but we don't know 100% about everything about what's going on with your gun and how it's being done and all the work to be able to take responsibility for that. You have to do that yourself. So that being said, if you do want to take that responsibility and make these modifications, that's the purpose of this video, is not only to explain how this works and how to modify your gun to do it, but also kind of the purpose and the idea behind it. So it's not uncommon for a lot of guys running Axis guns to want to have the ability to run like a 10-round drop box. Sorry about the jet noise, guys. We're next to a military base and they're doing some training runs, so we'll just tolerate the military here. So this is just the standard Axis 10-round drop box mag. So we run these completely unmodified. We don't have to make any changes to these to make them run after we've done the installation of this kit. And so these are the two main parts of the kit: the swing latch itself, and then the speed clip. And this speed clip looks a little funny, and I understand that, but once you see what it does and how well it works, I think it'll make sense to you. So when you look at the metal portions of these magazines, essentially they're the same. There's not a lot of difference. The front's the same. This metal tab that on the non-Axis guns is used to retain the front of the magazines is the same. On the back of the magazines, and on the Axis, it usually has a plastic tab on the front. This is a short action Axis magazine, and this is a long action Axis mag. And I've trimmed the tab off of both of these. If you have an Axis, you probably can look at yours. I've trimmed all mine, so I don't have one, but this is a plastic latch that's molded into the base of a factory Axis mag. And so they've used the same top portion with a very minor modification, but they've molded this in. And then in the stock, there's a little ramp that's kind of molded into the stock in this area where this boss is, and that's what that clip mates to retain the front of the magazine on an Axis instead of using this metal bit. And so we're going to take advantage of the fact that the metal bits are the same by using that tab in the front. Now in the back, there's some minor height difference between the Axis and the non-Axis, and hopefully you can see that here in the video, guys. So the Axis is got a little short tab by comparison, or it's a little shorter, and you can see how sharp these corners are by comparison to the non-Axis. And so let's assume that they've cut all these and then come back as a secondary process before they fold in them or whatever, and cut these Axis ones shorter. And I guess they do that intentionally so you're not running the same mags. But we're going to use these parts to take advantage of those things in order to be able to run both of these magazine types in the Axis after we've modified it. So you trim out that ramp, you take your swing latch assembly, and you can see here it's going to be pre-assembled like this when it comes in the kit. If the springs popped off or the O-rings popped off or something, that's usually because of shipping reasons. When we've packed them, they've been packed this way, and they should hopefully show up that way. If not, it's just a simple matter of pushing the spring back on, or the O-ring back in place, or the spacer. So it's not hard. This pin certainly is not going to come out on its own. So it's built like this for a couple of reasons. One, because we can ship it assembled like this, and then the other is the fact that we get to do the two important things we need to do in this assembly, building it this way. One is we need this head of this fastener to apply enough tension to the body of the swing latch so that it can't rotate once it's been torqued properly. And then the other is through the hardware here, the screw itself and the spacer in this O-ring, we can apply enough force on this pillar that's molded into the stock to properly bed the action, because it's not designed to be, the setup's not designed such that a fastener out here is what beds the action properly. It's actually the factory action screw applies force to this surface here, and so we need to do the same thing. So by doing this, we deal with any of the manufacturing tolerance stack up issues that we have in our assembly or the stocks themselves. And so we've had really good luck with these in that they shoot the same as they do using the factory action screw. So when we go to insert this assembly in the gun after we've trimmed out that ramp, the most important thing is to make sure that this little boss that extends between the two, the action screw hole and this, this recess for our swing latch, that doesn't push up and either bend or push the spring off its pin. So we just want to make sure that we clear that, and when we've done that, it should be pretty apparent that that's the case, and you can just push down and you can feel that O-ring kind of sit in place. And once your hardware bottoms out, you can go ahead and screw it in. Now when we screw it in, you can see it rotate a little bit. We're not worried about that at this point, so don't concern yourself with whether or not that's square right now. The most important thing is that we want to make sure that that spring is in place properly so that it's properly actuating that latch to grab this tab. If you hear the spring, then that means the spring is bent. If it's not being pushed in place at all, then that spring's been pushed off its pin. It's down there somewhere. You gotta find it. So, and it should be straight if you saw it before. So, just as long as that's in place and it's pushing on that swing latch properly, you're in good shape. Now, for a long action setup, you're done with the installation. You don't need to make any other changes to your gun. And we don't anticipate selling a lot of these, but if you got a 270 or a 06 or something and you've broken that tab, you may be buying this because instead of buying another magazine for about the same money and having that same plastic tab potentially break and do the same thing and cause the same problem, you're opting instead to go to a long action or a kit like that for the long action, not necessarily because you want to run the 10-round drop box. So for a long action setup, your installation's done. You don't have to do anything else. And so we don't have the dual compatibility kind of advantage on the long actions as we do on the short actions. And the reason for that is because this tab, you can see, is also short and sharp on the long action. So let's assume that if we look at a long action non-axis, and to be honest, I don't have one, and it's not, there's probably not enough volume of these to worry about. Let's assume that this has been cut as a secondary, much like this has, this is the long one. So I'm assuming if we look at a long action axis or a long action Savage magazine that's not an axis, we're going to see the tab look like this as opposed to this. So instead of trying to deal with that height difference, we're just going to say run your axis magazines only. If you want to run this mag upgrade, you're just going to trim that catch off the front. And the reason for that is because if we look inside here, you see the front of this, it's actually the cast aluminum trigger assembly, and this is the front of it, and that's what's grabbing that tab to retain the back of the magazine for the long action. And because that's the case, we don't want to modify that to try and get dual compatibility, because we don't have a simple solution like we do with the speed clip on the short actions. So if we look at what the speed clip does here, you can look at how it's installed, the large hole to the front that's flat, of course. And what this clip does is basically make up this height difference between the axis type tab and the non-axis type tab. So we did want it to make the gun backwards compatible. We wanted the guys to be able to run their axis mags. So we don't want to trim this ramp height down. And if we were to just file this down to this height difference, then potentially, we could have problems with that bolt coming forward and catching the head of the case and picking up that cartridge. And we didn't want that to be a problem. So by doing this, we get the compatibility of both, because the axis mags, this metal bit is wide enough to straddle the tab. So that tab is going to grab the top of that plastic the way it was designed and intended. And then this lower metal portion of the clip here itself provides a catch for the back of the Model 10 mags or other Axis non-Axis magazines. So that gives us that option there. And this part, like I said, is perfect. It's the right spring tension. It's very firm once you push it in place. You can do it by hand, but you'll have to use the butt of a screwdriver or something hard to push it on, because it's too hard to be done with your fingers. But once it's in place, it's good and solid. It perfect, you know, dimensions to straddle this tab and to grab this one, and so it just worked out so well. And so these kits are probably about half the money they'd be if we had to tool this part. So when you go to put this in place, the most important thing is that you just get it aligned left and right, because pretty much once you've forced it down as far as you can, it's in place. You don't have to worry about the height. So just take the trigger guard off, take your magazine, put it in place, and either make some marks or just use the tab itself when you force it down to align it left and right to make sure that you've got it properly set. And you can use this just as is to make sure that's the case. So we're grabbing that tab on both of those magazines now. So just take your trigger guard and put it back in place for your short actions. And then what you're going to do is just test your magazines and make sure that they click into place properly. And you should be able to hear them. And you might hear two clicks, one for the front and one for the back. If we're not making the back up already, I'm going to try and do just the back after the front here. But, you know, usually it's going to be the back first, and then that's it. But once you've got it in place, go ahead and test it. You know, pull on the back and pull on the front, and make sure, and give it a rock, and make sure that that thing is properly retained in the rifle. If you can rock, especially these longer ones because you got more leverage, if you can rock and actuate that spring latch so that it lets this thing go, then that means that swing latch is not addressing this tab squarely. You're catching a corner and it's rotated. And if that's the case, sometimes you can actuate that. So that's when you want to make that adjustment to make sure that it does that. And, you know, if we want to make that adjustment, if we see it looks like maybe it's a little cockeyed in a clockwise direction. And so just loosen it up, you know, quarter turn or whatever you need to, and then push it with your finger in the other direction. And you can make an adjustment to that. But in most cases, because that boss is pretty tight, you can't get much rotation out of it. So as far as installation, that's it. That's all you need to do. Just cut out that ramp, screw that guy in, make sure the spring's in place, and on the trigger guard, push the speed clip on, and make sure it's centered to grab those tabs. And that's it. Now your Axis can run these factory 10-round drop box mags without any modification. And then for the Axis mags, to run those, you just trim off that plastic clip. And again, we saw the long action. You don't have to worry about the trigger guard or any of the stuff. You're just going to trim out that ramp and bolt that guy in. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys and that you understand it. And if you have any questions or problems on these, let me know. The easiest way is look in the description of this video. There'll be a link to the eBay listing for these MagCatch upgrades. Send me a message through there, because that's going to come to me directly to my email, and you're more likely to get a response. If you just make try and send me a message or make a comment on the video, then you know it's really hard to keep up with, guys. So hope that works for you, and good luck. Be well. Thanks.